New York, New York, home to 8.3 million residents, boasts 32,000 streets, 5 boroughs, and 3 rivers, collectively forming a city unlike any other on Earth. What's even more astonishing is that upon reflecting on what defines the city's modern identity, be it its legendary skyline, renowned cultural attractions, or the vibrant pulse of its streets, you discover that nearly all elements making New York globally famous were absent just a century ago. This stems from the fact that much of the city's past has been molded by ongoing transformation, progress, and revitalization, reshaping New York beyond recognition over time. Yet, how did this place, beginning as a modest trading post for Europeans a mere 400 years ago, develop into the vast metropolis it is now? This is the story of how New York rose to become the world's greatest city. Long before the busy roads and lofty skyscrapers of today's New York, the region was covered with thick forests, winding rivers, and plentiful wildlife. The territory was inhabited by various Algonquian-speaking Native American tribes, with the Lenape people standing out, living in sync with nature, hunting, fishing, and farming the land peacefully for approximately 8,000 years until the first Europeans arrived. The European quest to explore and settle the Americas gained momentum at the start of the 16th century, as sailors from countries like Spain, France, and the Netherlands searched for new trade paths to these recently found resource-rich lands. In 1524, the Italian adventurer Giovanni da Verrazzano, sailing for France, became the first European to gaze upon the shores that would one day be New York Harbor, claiming it for France, though efforts to establish a colony there never took hold. It would be nearly another century before Europeans returned, and it was the Dutch who would ultimately leave the first enduring mark on what would evolve into New York City. In 1609, the English navigator Henry Hudson, working for the Dutch East India Company, was charged with locating the elusive Northwest Passage, believed to link the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. During this voyage, Hudson navigated up the northern river of New York Harbor, which now carries his name in tribute to his find, claiming the surrounding land for the Dutch Republic and laying the groundwork for future Dutch settlement and commerce in the area. The subsequent decades witnessed the establishment of Dutch trading outposts along the Hudson River, along with others scattered along the coast from the Delaware River to Cape Cod, delineating the broader territorial claims of the Dutch colony of New Netherland. At first, these isolated homes and their inhabitants concentrated solely on the trade generated by furs, but in 1624, the Dutch West India Company opted to dispatch a vessel loaded with settlers to create permanent civilian communities in the region. They initially landed on what is now Governor's Island, but were then spread across selected settlement sites throughout New Netherland, with a small contingent disembarking at the southern tip of Manhattan after deciding to build a fort there to safeguard the Hudson River entrance and the precious fur trade cargoes passing through it. With that, the foundations of Fort Amsterdam were set. Just a brief pause to inform you that producing these videos requires significant effort on our part, from researching and scripting to animating, editing, and finalizing the composition. Though this is a deeply cherished passion project that we adore, it can, like any job or facet of contemporary life, weigh heavily on our mental health. There have been instances when the pressure to meet deadlines, the strain of maintaining content quality, and the ongoing demand for creativity have left us feeling swamped and mentally exhausted. It's in these moments that we've come to recognize the value of prioritizing our mental well-being and seeking assistance when necessary. Just as we dedicate countless hours to crafting the finest content for our audience, it's equally vital to devote time and effort to nurturing our mental health, whether through taking breaks as needed, practicing self-care, or turning to professional support. We've discovered that tending to our mental health is essential for both our personal and professional lives, which is where BetterHelp, our paid partner today, steps in. BetterHelp is an online therapy service that simplifies the process of beginning therapy and reduces its intimidating nature. With BetterHelp, you can engage in therapy sessions via phone calls, video chats, or even messaging, whichever format feels most comfortable for you. They can pair you with one of over 1,000 qualified therapists in their network, matched to your specific needs, preferences, and location, offering access to a broader range of expertise that might not be available locally. If you feel your therapist isn't the right fit, you can change therapists with a single click in your settings at no extra charge. Join the over 4 million individuals who have used BetterHelp to embark on a healthier, happier life. Visit betterhelp.com. This is history, or select. This is heist. Or sign up for a special discount on your first month of therapy. In the subsequent year of 1626, with the aim of solidifying their claim to the new colony, the Director General of New Netherland, Peter Minuit, acquired the land of Manhattan from a small group of local Lenape Indians in exchange for traded goods valued at 60 guilders, approximately $1,000 in today's currency. From this point, the colony started to expand, and under Minuit's successor, Peter Stuyvesant, its population grew to about 1,500 people by 1655. However, Stuyvesant was broadly unpopular among the settlers due to the policies he enacted, which included restrictions on alcohol sales, efforts to dominate the Dutch Reformed Church, and the prevention of other religious groups like Quakers, Jews, and Lutherans from building places of worship in the colony. The Dutch West India Company tried to step in with more lenient policies and reforms, but these efforts were soon disrupted by the outbreak of war. In the latter half of the 17th century, the Netherlands engaged in a fierce rivalry with England to establish itself as the undisputed maritime and commercial superpower of the era. Between 1652 and 1673, a series of 3 conflicts known as the Anglo-Dutch Wars saw Dutch and English naval forces clash on the open seas for supremacy. It was against this context in 1653 that the residents of New Amsterdam chose to erect a defensive wall along the settlement's northern edge, now known as Wall Street, to guard against potential English attacks coming overland from New England to the north. Nonetheless, despite their best attempts to ward off any potential aggressors, in 1664, the English dispatched a modest fleet to seize the entire colony of New Netherland and its capital, New Amsterdam, from Dutch control. Stuyvesant was unable to muster any resistance and thus surrendered the city without a battle. The English renamed Fort Amsterdam as Fort James and redesignated the broader colony of New Netherland, along with the town of New Amsterdam itself, as New York in honor of James, the Duke of York, who would later ascend as King James II. New York briefly reverted to Dutch control in 1673, but was swiftly returned to the English under the Treaty of Westminster in 1674, which concluded the series of conflicts between the two nations. Under English governance, New York continued to expand and thrive, driven by a robust economy and a steady stream of immigrants arriving from Europe. The city, however, preserved many of its residents' institutions and customs introduced by the Dutch, including the practice of slavery, which had become deeply ingrained in New York's economy through the port's slave trade, to the extent that by the 1740s, about 20% of the city's residents, roughly 2,500 individuals, were enslaved. As the 18th century advanced, New York emerged as a focal point for political and cultural shifts in the years leading up to the American Revolution, serving as a base for the dissenting group known as the Sons of Liberty, who challenged the significant portion of New York's population loyal to the Crown. Likewise, the Stamp Act Congress of 1765 was held in New York to rally the American colonies against the Stamp Act imposed by the British government, articulating the grievances and taxation rights of the 13 colonies, which ultimately provided the ideological foundation for the Revolution and the ensuing Declaration of Independence. During the War of Independence, New York City played a crucial role. Initially occupied by the Continental Army's forces when hostilities began in 1775, the Battle of Long Island, fought in August of the following year, saw American troops under General George Washington suffer a devastating loss to the British. The ensuing British occupation of New York lasted throughout the war, with the city acting as a key strategic hub for their military campaigns across the nation. By 1783, however, the conflict concluded with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, prompting the British to withdraw their forces from the city, ending nearly a decade of occupation and allowing New York to shine as a beacon of liberty in the newly formed American nation. In January 1785, New York was selected as the new national capital and hosted some of the most significant events in the young nation's history, including the inauguration of the first President George Washington at Federal Hall in April 1789, alongside the formation of the first Congress and the drafting of the Bill of Rights, all within the same building on what is now Wall Street. With the advent of the 19th century, New York had risen as a global hub for finance and banking, with Wall Street and Lower Manhattan hosting the Bank of New York, established by Alexander Hamilton in 1784, and the New York Stock Exchange, founded in 1792. Similarly, as the early 1800s unfolded, New York flourished as a center of trade and commerce, with the completion of the Erie Canal in 1825, connecting the Great Lakes to the Hudson River and the Atlantic Ocean, transforming New York into the nation's leading port, surpassing Boston and Philadelphia in both significance and capacity. As the city grew in size, New York underwent a profound transformation as waves of immigrants from Europe and Asia boosted its population from 60,000 in 1800 to over 500,000 by mid-century, with newcomers escaping poverty, persecution, and political turmoil, seeking opportunity and a new beginning, thus turning the city into a dynamic mosaic of cultures and ethnicities. The city's population was further increased by the abolition of slavery in New York State in 1827, drawing in many freed African Americans. The Lower East Side in particular became a hub of immigrant life, with crowded tenements and lively marketplaces brimming with fresh arrivals from Italy, Ireland, Eastern Europe, and China. However, this dramatic population surge brought unforeseen challenges as the overcrowded living conditions became breeding grounds for diseases like cholera, which erupted multiple times starting in the 1830s, and many packed tenement buildings were razed in the Great Fire of New York in 1835, which destroyed about 50 acres of the city. Other impoverished, overcrowded areas like the Five Points and Hell's Kitchen faced their own poverty-related issues, with infamous criminal gangs such as the Dead Rabbits and the Bowery Boys prowling the streets and turning to minor theft, robbery, and violence to survive. The city's troubles persisted with the onset of the American Civil War, which engulfed the nation in 1861. Though New York State remained firmly in the Union, the city's strong commercial links to the South, combined with its growing immigrant community and frustration over conscription, created divided loyalties. The New York Draft Riot of 1863 erupted due to resentment over wealthy men buying their way out of service, and the resulting five-day uprising stands as one of the most severe episodes of civil unrest in American history. After the war, New York City experienced a cultural surge, with Central Park opened to the public in 1858, offering a green retreat and recreational space for all New Yorkers to enjoy. Meanwhile, the theaters of Broadway and the concert halls of Carnegie Hall welcomed a dazzling array of performers and productions, solidifying the city's status as the nation's cultural capital. Likewise, New York saw the establishment of several museums and libraries during this period, with the American Museum of Natural History founded in 1869, the Metropolitan Museum of Art opening in 1870, and the New York Public Library established in 1895. The rise in cultural offerings also spurred the growth of journalism, with newspapers like the New York Times, New York Herald, and New York World playing key roles in shaping public opinion and establishing the city as a national media center. New York's ongoing expansion northward along Manhattan Island, along with the development of ties to neighboring towns on Long Island, drove infrastructure projects like the Brooklyn Bridge, completed in 1883. Then, in 1886, perhaps New York's most emblematic and defining landmark was presented to the city by France. The Statue of Liberty was placed in the middle of New York Harbor, serving as a beacon of hope for the millions of immigrants arriving on its shores, many of whom passed through the immigration office on Ellis Island, established in 1892, on their way to new lives in America. The rapid pace of development within the city carried into the 20th century, with the new New York City subway opening in 1904, linking City Hall to Harlem and Brooklyn. The city's skyline also evolved during this time, with the Williamsburg and Manhattan bridges opening in 1903 and 1909 respectively, achievements surpassed only by the ambitious efforts of architects and developers aiming to construct the world's tallest and most lavish buildings, resulting in the iconic profiles of skyscrapers like the Woolworth Building, the Chrysler Building, and the Empire State Building, completed by the early 1930s, proudly showcasing the city's economic and architectural prowess to the world. Meanwhile, underground speakeasies and jazz clubs thrived during the city's era of extravagance in the 1920s, despite coinciding with Prohibition, when the federal government banned alcohol sales, leading to a flood of bootleg liquor and illegal entertainment, with estimates suggesting the city hosted between 30,000 and 100,000 clandestine clubs. The festive days of the Roaring Twenties, however, came to a sudden halt with the Wall Street crash of 1929 and the subsequent Great Depression of the 1930s. As banks collapsed, businesses shut down, and unemployment skyrocketed, leaving millions of New Yorkers jobless and struggling to get by. Many of the city's parks, including Central Park, became shelters for thousands of desperate individuals who built shantytowns dubbed Hoovervilles, a sarcastic nod to President Herbert Hoover for permitting their hardship. The city's fortunes began to turn with the outbreak of World War II in 1939, though the United States would not join for another 2 years. New York City geared up for war as factories produced tanks, planes, and ships for the Allied effort, while its ports and docks became critical lifelines for transporting goods across the Atlantic. When the U.S. finally entered the conflict in 1941, many troops, sailors, and airmen set out on massive ocean liners from New York's docks, carrying them to the front lines. The post-war years saw New York evolve into the city it is today, as many of the world's other major cities lay in ruins, allowing New York to gain new global prominence. It became the home of the United Nations headquarters in 1952 and took over Paris's role as the center of the global art scene, while also challenging London's financial markets by the 1960s. Though the 1970s marked the city with notoriety for crime and deprivation, initiatives to modernize and revitalize led to the redevelopment or demolition of many pre-war structures, making way for modern glass and steel edifices like the World Trade Center, completed in 1973. Since then, like all cities, New York has faced its share of trials and tribulations. What sets New York apart as perhaps the greatest city in the world, however, is its ability to rise again and reinvent itself no matter how often it has been knocked down or set back, a feat that many other global cities might find difficult to accomplish. Throughout its 400-year history, the city has continually adapted and progressed time and again, reaching a point where it is utterly unrecognizable from the small Dutch settlement it once was all those years ago.